the land question in South Africa is still a contentious issue. Some of you would have read a couple of days ago, residents of Johannesburg up in arms following to fight the legalization of what they call backyard units on residential properties. They have vowed to fight this tooth and nail. Well, it's part of the city's allocation of land program. And joining me this evening is Dr. Vuyokazi Mahlathi, who is the chairperson of the advisory panel on land reform that was appointed by President Cyril Ramaphosa to advise him and his government on what to do next. Dr. Mahlathi, good evening. Thanks very much for your time. Now, we invited you, one, because of the issues just highlighted, but also we're assuming that after handing over your report to the president, you didn't sit back and say, well, we've done what we were asked to do, and we're taking no interest in this matter anymore. Just from your observations of what has happened, the things that have been said after you submitted your report, do you think that everyone is ready to put shoulder to the wheel and do what's required?
Well, I believe that our job is done, because our focus and terms of reference were about putting together the report, and we have submitted the report. And what is good is that government is currently busy, with a formal response to the report. And I think what is important, though, that one can share is being humbled by the fact that we've been moving the whole team, different members at different times, sharing the report, discussing the report with different stakeholders in government, outside of government, with the civil society, with academics, with private sector. And generally, the response is positive. And what you're referring to now is also something that we are appreciating. Just, I think today, where also the Metro of Ekurhuleni was announcing parcels of land that are being released for farming within Ekurhuleni. So in a sense, I think what is critical is that there is a heightened, engagement as far as the issue is concerned, but most importantly, people within government as well as private sector are beginning to look at solutions in terms of addressing this critical problem that we're facing at this moment in time.
Before we get to the two examples, Ekurhuleni and Johannesburg, and what is happening there, from the engagements you've been having with the stakeholders, are there very specific things that they particularly like or appreciate about the body of work that you've put before the nation?
I think, as we know, generally the body of work is appreciated. And what is appreciated mostly is basically being more specific in terms of proposals and recommendations and the diagnosis of the problem. As usual, we agree on the diagnosis of the problem, everybody, but it's with the solutions that you will find different approaches and disagreements. And in this case, truly speaking, the focus of disagreement has been a principal disagreement around the issue of expropriation without compensation. But generally, there is support for the proposals. But what's interesting, even with the expropriation without compensation within the private sector, we are actually finding that people are happy with the clarity that we are offering within this debate. And actually now, for instance, we proposed the conditions for expropriation without compensation and came up with kind of 10 of them. And, even the financial services sector is saying, okay, we hear you, but give us more. What do you mean by heavily indebtedness? What do you mean? So we are at that level of focusing on definitions. And we're hoping that government, and we do know that government is busy now looking at those areas. And within the 2 months that the cabinet had actually suggested, we would soon, hopefully, hear what those actions would be.
Perhaps, I mean, you may want to sort of take our viewers once more through the land distribution without compensation issue. Perhaps what, from the conversations you've been having, is most contentious, because I mean, it's not only that, because I mean, somewhere you also even there are instances where you say or you feel that compensation can actually be zero, which is quite contentious, you know. Perhaps you can take us through what your thinking was and what it is that you're trying to cater for.
Well, I guess the big issue, I mean, was whether there is a case for expropriation without compensation or not. But our terms of reference were focusing on under which conditions. So Parliament has already had the process of public hearings. So ours was basically to assist. And we looked at it, but we had to go back to basically amongst ourselves have that dialogue, and obviously evidence-based dialogue with different people and their different views. And the conclusion that the majority of the team came to was the fact that, as is, the Constitution, Section 25, refers to just and equitable compensation. So, in a sense, compensation is the focus still. And talking about nil or zero compensation can be and will be contested because it doesn't specifically clarify, you know, whether it accommodates that. It focuses mainly on the just and equitable. So for that reason, we came to the conclusion, the majority, that we need to amend the Constitution so that we can clarify that, you know, there are certain conditions where this zero compensation or nil compensation is warranted, and we offer which conditions those are. But I think what is important for these debates is that expropriation without compensation is actually an acquisition method, one of the acquisition methods. So it does not define land reform in its entirety. And the bulk of the report shifts attention to what we are having to do within the urban as well as the rural environment to begin to address land reform more specifically and in a more targeted way and more systematically. And I think that's where the debate needs. And the good thing about most of that, you don't even necessarily need, with the majority of it, new legislation. It's a matter of how do you restructure, reorganize, reprioritize in order to target people more specifically.
Now, which brings us to a discussion I'm about to have with a couple of people from Johannesburg. Now, apparently they've formed committees and lobby groups, residents who are unhappy about what they believe is going to be, a cheapening of their areas or places where they live. There's going to be shebeens and backyard units that are going to come with what other people reckon is integration that needs to happen, especially given the fact that in many of these urban areas there's very limited space to do much of what can be done. Just what your thoughts, with respect to urban areas and what needs to happen there?
Well, we expect people to be nervous, okay? Because if you've been privileged most of your life and you didn't have to worry about who is next door to you and have that privilege, obviously you become nervous all of a sudden because you don't know what's going to happen. But the truth of the matter is that worldwide, the shift is towards integrated settlements because of a number of reasons. So from an environmental sustainability and also urbanization, rapid urbanization, where space is a big issue. In our country, it is a bigger issue because of our historical reasons, and urban, actually, we are showing in the report where we're saying 80% of the urban dwellers, particularly within the peri-urban areas, who are residing on 2% of the land. So, and picture it, You know, you and I come from townships, and we know within our forums, each room in some homes is a household, and the backyards are households. You get to Johannesburg, the hostels, each room, actually not even each room, each bed is a household. So if you sit and, you know, taking it further to informal settlements, there's this crisis. You don't need to be convinced by a study. You see it. You live with it. So the critical issue is to appreciate that people are not animals. You know, people appreciate order. People appreciate, but they do need land. They need to be assisted by a systematic master plan that actually addresses the issue of landlessness and begins to look at what solutions we can. And we come up with those solutions in the report, particularly from the urban as well as the rural, but urban because previously land reform policy has focused more on agriculture and rural. So in this case, we made it a point that we address that from ensuring that land is being shared from government as well as private sector. But we also take it further in terms of identification of buildings that can be turned around to address the issue of particularly residential needs.
But now one issue these residents are raising is the issue of consultation. But we know from history that often consultation or lack of consultation complaint is usually a euphemism for saying we disagree. And people do that, I mean, ever so often. Do you go beyond to then say this is how this can be best managed, assuming that, of course, you are, whatever you're putting out there is informed by perhaps international best practice, given what you're saying is what is happening throughout the world these days, and the future, you know, of people in the urban areas is in going this route and not in excluding.
Well, I mean, you know, the good thing in our country is that legislation, you know, formulation and policy formulation is actually, you know, undergirded by a participatory process. We've seen cases where parliament or government has been taken to court and actually decisions being reversed because of participation. So that is something that we're lucky our constitutional democracy affords us.
It's catered for.
And it's already there. And in a sense, what we're now pushing is to ensure that what we're saying in the report is that government has to come up with engagements, particularly with the landowners, and actually begin to make everybody appreciate the need. And this deals with churches, mining houses, including the agricultural sector, and property owners. And we've met with them, and you know, they've come up with suggestions in terms of how what can be done and what is possible. So all those are there. And some of the reports, I mean, not everything is in the report because we did an analysis and have some papers that we wrote, which we are sharing with government to address specific areas that are not necessarily in the report. So I believe that solutions are there, and there's space for even going into more detail. And government has the opportunity to do that, because in some areas, for instance, where we couldn't go further, we proposed that, you know, there be further investigation.
Dr. Mahlatsi, thanks very much for your time this evening.